Hello, this is Clinton Power, founder of australiacounselling.com.au, and it's my great pleasure to be speaking today with Candice Platter, who is a Vancouver-based addictions expert. Hello, Candice.
Hello, Clinton. Hello, everyone in Australia.
It's so lovely to be speaking with you, and specifically today I want to ask you about addictions because I know this is really something you've been specialising in for many, many years now. And lots of people don't understand the difference between a habit and an addiction. Can you explain the difference to us?
Well, I think everybody has ways that we hide a little bit, that we kind of distract ourselves from life. For some people, it's television, or it's chocolate, one of my downfalls, or, various kinds of things like that. When a habit becomes detrimental to one's life, if I was eating tons of chocolate every day and gaining a lot of weight and, my teeth were rotting, that kind of thing, I would say I had an addiction. But to have a little bit every day, at least I like to think that that's just a habit. Who knows?
Okay, so...
But the difference is that when I'm kind of making light of it, but if somebody has if somebody's been using mind-altering substances, for example, a habit becomes an addiction when it really starts to take over a person's life, interferes with their relationships, interferes with their job, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. But for some people, there's a fine line because there are many people out there who perhaps do use drugs recreationally. They like to drink on a regular basis. How would you know individually, or even if a loved one was maybe tipping over into an addiction?
The way I see it, there are three basic stages of addiction. And the first one, the beginning stage, is when a person is kind of ignoring that inner voice that says, maybe there might be something going on here. And other people, their loved ones, the people around them, don't want to make a big deal of it. They're only going to the casino once a week, so what? Kind of minimizing it. The next one is the progressive stage where, addiction is a progressive condition. It becomes worse over time. So the second stage, that's what's happening. So somebody who maybe used cocaine once in a while, maybe at a party, starts to use it maybe on the weekends as well, right? And then the third stage is the advanced stage, and that's where, we'll just take the cocaine. The person using cocaine is not just using it on weekends anymore. He's using it, using it every day, or almost every day, or yearning for it every day, even if they're not doing it every day. So it becomes overpowering. It just takes over a person's life in the advanced stage. So that's also the time usually when people start to notice, the people around them start to notice, and hopefully the person who's actually got the addiction is starting to notice too. Because what I know to be true from my own personal use, I'm a recovering addict with 26 years clean and sober right now. But I remember what it was like as if it was yesterday using substances. So what I know from my own personal experience and also working with clients for as many years as I have been is that addicts know within themselves when they have a problem long before they reach out for help. So hopefully in the progressive or in the advanced stages, they're starting to really know and making a decision to come out of active addiction and be in some kind of active recovery.
That sounds important, what you say there about listening to that inner voice. So if you start to have some questions or concerns about your own use, that it's important to listen to that and take note of that, not to ignore it.
Yes, if you can, it's a great thing to do.
Is it true, I've heard people talk about addiction as a disease. Is it true that for some people it is a biological disease that maybe some people can never get over? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm kind of a different mindset than that. I don't really I don't know. I'm not a medical person, so I don't know if addiction is a medical disease. I know it's said that it's a medical disease. Um, Certainly, there is brain involvement in addiction, of course. But I also know that there's brain involvement if I just kind of go like this. There's brain involvement in everything that we do, right? Um, the problem that I have with looking at it as a disease or a brain disease is that sometimes we talk about that just too much, and addicts start to think, they either think to themselves, well, they feel hopeless. It's like, well, I have this disease, I can't do anything about it, you know, or they get really righteous and they get kind of manipulative and they say, well, I'm an addict, I have a disease, don't tell me to stop. So I think there's a problem with using the disease model sometimes. Um, there's also the belief, and I think this is probably true, that there's a genetic component to addiction. And also we learn addictions at home. So if we grow up in an alcoholic home, for example, and we see that alcohol is used when the going gets tough, or shopping is used, or gambling, or chocolate, that's what we're going to be doing. But to me, Clinton, whether it's a medical disease, whether it's a brain disease, whether it's got a genetic component, whether we learn it at home, I almost don't care about any of those things. I mean, I care and I think it's important, but what's underneath it that I think is more important is that addiction is a choice. And what I mean by that is that, I don't think that people sign up to be addicts. I don't think anybody chooses to be an addict. They don't say to themselves, gee, that's going to be fun, let's do that, I know I didn't do that. And in fact, for most people who are using addictive behaviors, they think to themselves, well, addiction won't get me. I can handle it. So most people don't want to become addicted, right? So I don't think anybody decides to be an addict. But what I'm saying is that when we are in active addiction, and we know that there is a problem, when the addict knows that there is a problem, that's the choice point. And so then that's when they can decide, I'm either going to stay in active addiction, I don't care what anybody says, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to decide to go into active recovery of some sort. And when you go into any 12-step meeting, the 12-step people are the ones who call addiction a disease. Most of the people who call it a disease are in 12-step programs, which, I mean, I love 12-step programs, please don't get me wrong, but that's where that comes from. But if you walk into a 12-step meeting, every single person in there has made the choice to come out of active addiction and go into active recovery. And 12-step meetings are not the only route to recovery, but what I'm saying is that everybody has made that choice. If they're in a meeting like that, they've made the choice. So underneath everything else, we make a choice to recover. And I think when we're looking at the loved ones of addicts, if you don't mind my going to that place, when we look at the loved ones, I think that they have an addiction as well, and I think that they can make a choice as well. I think the loved ones often become addicted to the addict's addiction and go into the same chaos and ride the same roller coaster. So if the addict in their life is doing well, then they're doing well, or at least okay. If the addict in their life isn't doing well, then they're really not doing well. And on it goes. And so the loved ones need to come off that roller coaster, need to start looking after themselves and make a choice to be in their own recovery of some sort, working with somebody like me, going to Al-Anon, going to different, Codependence Anonymous, or reading some books, and learning about addiction, learning what enabling is, and learning how to not do that. It's a choice. All of this is a choice.
So let's talk about, if I'm an addict, or perhaps I'm concerned I'm developing an issue with some kind of mind-altering substance, what are my options?
I think there are a number of options. If you know and you're ready, then there's counseling with somebody who is a specialist in addictions. There's, like I say, there's 12-step programs. 12-step programs, as great as they can be, don't work for everybody. We know that now. So there are some alternatives. I think you have them there too. I think we've talked about this before: smart recovery and
Yes.
and rational recovery, and some other types of programs. There are treatment centers that do wonderful work. Some of them are residential treatment centers that keep you for a month or two. There are outpatient counseling services where you go once a week. You still live at home in your community, but you go once a week to counseling. I think there are a number of options. I don't know exactly what Australia offers, but I would think that they offer those kinds of resources.
Yes, that's correct. And you're correct, smart recovery is very popular here as well as AA. But do you think an addict needs to hit rock bottom? Because I know part of the recovery process, I've heard, is that relapse is very common. But do addicts need to hit rock bottom before they seek help? Or do you see that some addicts actually kind of nip it in the bud?
Well, I think there are actually some people who recognize that they have a problem and just simply stop whatever the addiction is. I have trouble understanding that. I know that they can do that. I couldn't do that. But I know there are people who can. In terms of reaching bottom, I think there are high bottoms and there are low bottoms. And my bottom was pretty low. I was pretty high functioning for a while until I really broke down. And I was so depressed after so many years of using drugs and was basically suicidal. And that was my bottom because I did not want to die. I just didn't want to live the way I was living, which is how a lot of people feel in that situation. But I think again, with the loved ones, if addicts have people around them who are enabling them, who are rescuing them, who are paying their rent, who are, allowing them to be obnoxious and abusive, verbally or physically, who are allowing a lot of these things to happen and not setting boundaries with them, then really, why should an addict change anything? Addicts are very scared to give up whatever their drug or behavior of choice is. It's become a way of life to them. It's become kind of their best friend. Who am I without this? That kind of hole in the donut feeling of who am I without this? So the loved one's job, I think, is to make it as uncomfortable as possible for an addict to continue the addiction. Because the most loving thing we can do for an addict is help them stop, not enable them to continue.
Well, you've
right?
really anticipated my next question because I wanted to ask you, what can loved ones do if they are seeing someone they care about start to spiral down into the grips of addiction? So I guess what I'm hearing you saying is they need to stop making it so easy and comfortable and supporting them in maintaining the addiction. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And often what happens is that the addicts aren't ready to get help. They're still, even though they may be suffering terribly and struggling in their lives, they're so scared to give it up. They're just so scared to give it up. They're as scared to give up their addiction as the loved one is to stop enabling. Because loved ones fear that if they stop doing and doing and doing for an addict, if they stop letting them live at home and not pay any rent, then he's going to be out on the street and he's going to die out there, right? So there, and of course that's a possibility. There's no guarantees. But so, the addict is as scared to give up their addiction as the loved ones are to give up their addiction to the addict. This is what you have to understand. So, yes, often, I'm trying to get back to the thought I was talking about. Often what happens is that the addicts aren't ready to get help as soon as the loved ones are. The loved ones kind of get to the place where they're at the end of their rope. We've tried everything. We don't know what to do anymore. we're tearing our hair out. And that's when they come and see me, or they read my book, and start with their own recovery from this. And once that starts to happen, I have seen this so many times. Once the loved ones start making changes, the ripple effect is that the addicts almost always, no guarantees, the addict almost always starts to make changes too.
And I know that you've specialised for many years now in working with the loved ones of addicts, and that you're highly experienced in this area. And I think, as you mentioned before, enabling is such a big part of the picture here. And many of the loved ones I've spoken to as well are just quite terrified of cutting off the love and the support because of what you just said then. They actually, many believe that their loved one will die, and then they will feel remorse and guilt. So that must be so difficult to, and I guess I'm getting the picture, they need so much support in starting to make it less comfortable for the addict.
Yes, they really do need support with that. And they need people like myself, counselors, therapists, who can work with them in a skilled kind of way to give them that support. There are treatment centers that have family programs as well. Unfortunately, most of them are just kind of educational, and they're not really sharing programs where loved ones can go in and say, what do I do? But yes, what loved ones don't understand often is that if we continue to enable, there's just as good a chance, and maybe greater, that the addict will die anyway from his own hand if he's suicidal, or he has enough money to keep buying drugs and buying drugs and buying drugs and using them. So, it's just a very scary prospect all the way around, but we need to make the addicts uncomfortable in the addiction.
So can you give us some examples, maybe some little tips of what could loved ones that maybe have become aware that they are enabling a loved one with an addiction, what could they start to do, or maybe even consider to do, to make it less comfortable for the addict?
Well, I think one of the first kinds of things to do is to set boundaries, to set really clear, loving boundaries, and to say to the addict that they love in a non-charged moment, if possible, because if it's all, if you're in a kerfuffle with an addict, you don't want to set a boundary then. Nothing's going to get done that way. But, you say to the addict, I love you so much, and it's just tearing me up to watch you do to yourself what you're doing. So if you want to continue doing what you're doing, you're going to have to do it somewhere else. And I'm no longer going to be giving you money that helps you use drugs. I expect more of you. I'm raising the bar here. And it's not because I don't love you, it's because I do love you. It's because I want you to stay alive, and name these things for the addict that you love. Right?
And would part of that be consequences as well? So if there is no change in behavior, you let them know what the consequence will be?
Yep. So, I'm working with a couple right now who have a daughter in their 20s who is very addicted, who doesn't live at home. She has very violent relationships with men, and she lives with them, basically. But sometimes she comes home, and when she comes home, she's usually high or drunk, and she's really rude and really obnoxious, and she kicks holes in the walls, and she does things like that, right? And that might be excessive. Maybe the addict you love isn't doing that much, but remember that addiction is progressive, and it could get that bad if it isn't now. And if you're minimizing about how bad it is, I would suggest you be careful with that. So what I'm doing with this couple is helping them be able to set some boundaries with her. We're very much at the beginning stages with this, but one thing that I suggest to them is that they say to her, again, we love you, and you're welcome in our home. We want to see you. We miss you when you're not here, but we don't want you here when you're stoned or when you're drunk. This is a zero tolerance thing now, and it's not negotiable anymore. So you're not to be here when you're drunk or when you're stoned. But when you're not, when you're not under the influence, if you would like to come for dinner, bring your laundry, we'd love to see you. So if you come and you've been using, or if you're sober, you're clean and sober, and you come to our home and you start being abusive with us, you start being obnoxious, you start, punching things or throwing things or whatever, we will ask you to leave right then. There will be no warnings. You will be out. You can come back another time, but you will not be staying. So these kinds of things. So you're not condoning bad behavior. The most loving thing you can do for an addict is to not condone their bad behavior and to validate the positive behavior. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Because we need to learn how to, many loved ones need to learn how to separate the behavior from the person. Addicts are wonderful people. We're wonderful people. Most of us are very smart and we can be very capable and, we're wonderful people, but not when we're under the influence. So we need to be able to separate the behavior from the person. We can still love the person and absolutely abhor the behavior and not put up with it.
This is such an important conversation because the way you work and what you're speaking about is not just about treating the person with the addiction or dependence, but it sounds to me it's much more holistic. It's looking at the whole picture, including the loved ones that may be enabling and giving them just as much support as the addict, which unfortunately I think a lot of treatment programs, it sounds like that equality is not quite there yet.
That's true. Unfortunately, there aren't enough resources for the loved ones, not really good ones. They're just not there. But, the more noise we make and the more books like I've written, the more noise we make about that we need more resources, because the reality is that for every one addict, you've got at least a dozen, probably more, people who are directly affected by that addiction. So you've got mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, siblings, bosses, teachers, therapists, doctors. I mean, how many have I named? 15 so far? Everybody's affected. You walk down the street now, and pretty much everyone you see on the street is going to have somebody in their life whose addiction is affecting them.
So this is a community issue.
Yeah, they're not wearing a sign saying, I have an addict in my life and I'm affected, but they are. And I'm not glad about that, but I think it's helping the stigma of the shame of this so that loved ones are starting to talk about it more, and they're starting to go to groups, and they're starting to go to counseling, and they're starting to get some help for themselves instead of living in the shame, because so many loved ones believe, incorrectly, I think, that they have caused their addict's addiction, that they're to blame, it's their fault, and they feel so ashamed about that, especially parents and spouses, right? There's a kind of what they call a joke, it isn't funny, but a joke in AA that if you drink too if you had a wife like mine. Well, that's crazy. That's not why the guy's drinking. The guy's drinking not because he has a wife like he has. He's drinking because he's choosing to deal with his reality that way. So loved ones are not at fault for the addiction, for the addict choosing to be in active addiction. They're not at fault for that. That's the addict's choice. That's on the addict. So when the loved ones start to recover from all that shame and guilt and all the stuff they've been carrying around and start developing some self-respect and treating themselves better and focusing on their own lives, then the addicts kind of go, oh, that's interesting, and some changes start being made. They want a piece of that.
Now, I want to say congratulations to you because I heard recently that you have just been invited to be a regular contributor to Huffington Post, which is a huge kudos and a wonderful opportunity for you to obviously broaden the reach of your message, really reach many, many more people about this important information.
Thank you. It's so exciting for me. Yes, I'm a blogger on the Huffington Post.
Now let's talk briefly about your book because it's won many awards. The two books actually, Loving an Addict, Loving
Yeah,
Yourself, and
I have a copy of it right here.
oh,
Can you see it?
yes, I can see it.
Okay,
The
so
top 10 survival tips
for loving someone with an
for
addiction.
loving someone with an addiction, and there's
Yeah.
also an accompanying workbook as well. So just tell us briefly about how this book came about.
Okay. This book came about because I was working in the downtown east side area of Vancouver, which is the lowest income postal code of Canada. It's the lowest income area and has the most active addicts, alcoholics per capita in all of Canada. So I worked as an alcohol and drug counselor. Once I had about 3 years clean and sober myself, I started working down there, and I was actually there for 16 years in an agency, in a nonprofit agency. And toward the end of that time, what was happening for me is that I was getting a lot of phone calls from the loved ones of addicts, and sometimes they were my clients and sometimes they weren't my clients. Sometimes the addicts were my clients and sometimes they weren't. But the loved ones were calling and saying, we just don't know what to do anymore, can you help us? So I started seeing them as well. We'd have sessions, and when I first started doing that, I had no clue how to help them, what to say to them. But I started listening to the stories that they were telling me, and there was a pattern, and the pattern is the enabling. They were doing things like, giving money to an addict, which is never a good idea. They were driving the addict to the dealer because at least they knew that the addict was with them and not off in the street somewhere. So I knew that that wasn't kosher, that wasn't okay, So as time went on, I started to understand how to work with the loved ones and how to guide them, and we started having some really good success. But I realized that I couldn't work with everybody who was contacting me, and I couldn't work with people in Australia, who needed some help, or other places. So I actually do now, though. I have clients in Australia, actually. I do telephone and Skype counseling, so I have clients pretty much all over the world. But at that point, I decided that I was going to write a book to, help people who were in the situation get a handle on what they could do and what they were doing wrong. Because even though a loved one isn't at fault for the addict's addiction, what they really need to get is that they've contributed. They're not at fault, but they have contributed. And the way they've contributed to it is by allowing it to continue, allowing it, by enabling the addict to stay comfortable in the addiction. So the book is about how to focus more on yourself, how to be able to detach from that, come off that roller coaster. This is not your life. You don't have to do this. You don't have to live this way. You can love someone and not live this way.
Wonderful. I mean, it sounds like this is such an important resource for the families and loved ones of addicts.
It seems to be, I've never really gotten any negative feedback on it. So,
well, I think more than that, you've won a number of prestigious awards as well.
Yeah, both the book and the workbook have won USA and international book awards, much to my own surprise. I have one negative comment quite a long time ago, and that was from an addict who didn't like my book, and I can well understand why she didn't like my book, because it was teaching her loved ones not to help her be in her addiction. Yes. So, but from the loved ones, I just get really positive feedback. Yeah.
Now, for anyone watching or listening to this interview, they're probably thinking, how can I get my hands on your book and the workbook? What are some of the options for people who want to get immediate access to this?
Well, if you want absolute immediate access, you could do a couple of things. You can go onto my website. Will that be on your website? Will that?
Yes, just say CandicePlateau.com. Is that right?
CandicePlateau.com, as long as you spell it right. So it's CANDACE, and it's PLATTOR. so you can go on my website and you can download right away a PDF version of the book and the workbook. You get it right away. You can also go onto Amazon and get it on Kindle right away. It's on Amazon. The print books are on Amazon. I don't know if you have Barnes and Nobles there or if you have Chapters.
No.
Okay, so probably just staying with Amazon right now because that's what we know you have. Is probably the best way to either get it on your Kindle or or your iPad. I don't have a Kindle, but I download Kindle books on iPad all the time, or the print book, or the PDF right away. I think there's the ebook is the Kindle book. That's right. It's the electronic book. Yeah.
Great. So there's lots of options there. You can go straight to Candice's website. As you said, CandicePlator.com. That's PLATTOR. CandicePlator.com. You can get an immediate PDF download. And if you do prefer to read the book on Kindle, you can get that through the Amazon store or order the hard copy. And I have to say, I have a copy of both these books. I think it's a fabulous resource. Even as a therapist myself, I'm going to be returning to this book over and over again and recommending it to any of my clients that are suffering from an addiction. So thank you so much for writing the book.
And you know what? I'm just thinking what happens often with me with clients is that they use the workbook and they answer the questions in the workbook and then we go over that. So if you find a therapist who's not that skilled in addiction or not that skilled in working with loved ones, you can help educate. But what you can do is you can answer the questions, bring those into your session. Talk about those with your therapist in the session.
Fabulous advice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to us today, Candice. It is always a pleasure, and I'm just looking forward to reading you every week in the Huffington Post. And
well, let's hope I can write that often. But yeah,
it sounds like it's a very exciting next chapter is beginning. So I'm wishing you all the best, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Clinton. Bye, everyone.
Bye for now.